You are standing in line at a coffee shop. Everything is calm, everything is ordinary. Then, without warning, the person in front of you snaps at the barista over something trivial. A wrong cup size, a missing straw. Their face twists. Their voice sharpens, and for a moment you think, what is wrong with that person? But here is the more important question. Have you ever been that person? Most of us have. And most of us had no idea why. This is not a video about judging human behavior. This is a video about understanding it at its deepest, most scientific level. Because the truth is, the behavior you label as strange, irrational, or inexplicable in others is rarely accidental. It follows a pattern. It follows a design. And once you understand that design, nothing about people will ever surprise you in quite the same way again. To understand why people act the way they do, you have to go back, far back, to a time before language, before civilization, before logic as we know it. Inside your skull, beneath the sophisticated layers of rational thought, lives a far older structure. Neuroscientists call it the limbic system. Psychologists sometimes call it the emotional brain. But for our purposes, think of it simply as the survival engine, and it has been running without interruption for approximately 200 million years. This is the part of your brain that scans every room you enter for threat. It is the part that makes your heart race before a presentation. It is the part that causes a grown adult to slam a door, cry without knowing why, or make an impulsive decision they will regret by morning. The critical insight here is this: your brain was not designed for the modern world. It was designed for predators, scarcity, and tribe survival. The problem is that it is still using that ancient logic to navigate traffic jams, workplace politics, and social media. When someone feels publicly embarrassed, their brain registers it with the same neurological intensity as a physical threat. When someone loses status in a group, the brain treats it like losing access to food. Strange behavior, in many cases, is simply survival behavior, misapplied. But the evolutionary brain is only the foundation. Built on top of it is an equally powerful layer: the system of cognitive biases that govern how every human being processes reality. A cognitive bias is not a flaw in broken people. It is a mental shortcut, a factory setting, installed in all of us to help the brain process the overwhelming volume of information it receives every second. And while these shortcuts are efficient, they are also profoundly distorting. Consider confirmation bias, the brain's deep preference for information that agrees with what it already believes. This is why two people can read the same headline and walk away with completely opposite conclusions. They are not lying. They are not stupid. Their brain is simply filtering reality through the lens of what it already holds to be true. Or consider cognitive dissonance, the psychological discomfort that occurs when a person's actions contradict their beliefs. Watch someone justify a bad decision they know was wrong, and you are watching cognitive dissonance in real time. The mind will construct elaborate narratives, deflect blame, and rewrite memory itself, all to protect the internal story it tells about itself. These are not personality defects. They are the architecture. They are the default settings running in the background of every human interaction you have ever witnessed. There is one more layer that makes human behavior even more complex. We are not just products of our biology. We are products of each other. Psychologists have long established that human beings are profoundly social creatures, wired at a neurological level to mirror the emotions, energy, and behaviors of the people around them. This is the function of mirror neurons, brain cells that activate both when you perform an action and when you simply observe someone else performing it. What this means in practice is startling. The angry person in the coffee shop may have absorbed that anger from a tense commute, a stressed household, or a conversation that happened 2 hours before you ever saw them. Behavior is contagious. Mood is transferable. And what looks like a personal choice is often an unconscious absorption of the surrounding environment. We are, in ways we rarely acknowledge, mirrors of each other. If your behavior is shaped by an ancient brain built for a world that no longer exists, if your perception of reality is filtered through biases you did not choose, and if your emotional state is partially borrowed from the people around you, then how much of what you call your behavior is actually yours? That question is not meant to unsettle you. It is meant to free you, because understanding the mechanism is always the first step to transcending it. Here is something no one tells you about self-awareness. It is not a personality trait. It is not something you either have or you do not. It is a skill, measurable, trainable, and backed by decades of cognitive science. And the people who develop it do not just understand others better. They become almost impossible to manipulate, destabilize, or confuse. But before we get to the solution, we need to go deeper into the problem. Because the behaviors that seem strangest in people, the ones that make you shake your head, step back, or lose faith in human rationality, almost never come from nowhere. They come from pressure, from fracture, from a self that has been quietly overwhelmed for far longer than anyone realized. Let us talk about cortisol, the hormone your body releases under stress. In small doses, it is useful. It sharpens focus. It prepares you for action. In its original biological design, it was meant to spike briefly during danger and then return to baseline once the threat had passed. But here's what modern life has done. It has kept the threat signal running permanently. Chronic stress does not just make people tired or irritable. It physically restructures the brain. Prolonged cortisol exposure has been shown to shrink the prefrontal cortex, the very region responsible for rational decision-making, impulse control, and long-term thinking. Simultaneously, it enlarges and hypersensitizes the amygdala, the brain's alarm system, making a person more reactive, more defensive, and more prone to behavior that, from the outside, looks completely irrational. This is the science behind the colleague who overreacts to minor feedback, the friend who withdraws without explanation, the family member who explodes over something small and then cannot explain why. They are not dramatic. They are not difficult by design. In many cases, they are operating with a neurologically compromised decision-making system, one that has been quietly eroded by sustained, unrelenting pressure. Strange behavior is frequently the visible surface of invisible suffering. Now consider something even more unsettling. People do not just behave differently under stress. They become different people depending on the role they believe they are supposed to play. In the 1970s, psychologist Philip Zimbardo conducted what became one of the most disturbing experiments in the history of social science, the Stanford Prison Experiment. Ordinary, psychologically healthy individuals were randomly assigned roles as either prisoners or guards. Within days, the guards began exhibiting authoritarian, dehumanizing behavior. The prisoners became passive and emotionally broken. No one was acting. The role had consumed the person. You do not need a laboratory to see this. Watch how someone's entire communication style shifts the moment they receive a promotion. Observe how a person changes in a large crowd versus a one-on-one conversation. Notice how people who seem confident in private become unrecognizable under public scrutiny. This is identity fragility, and it is far more common than we acknowledge. When a person's sense of self is built entirely on external validation, social status, or the approval of others, any perceived threat to that foundation triggers behavior that looks, from the outside, almost theatrical in its strangeness. They are not being fake. They are being fractured. And a fractured identity produces fractured behavior. So where does this leave us? With something remarkably powerful and remarkably simple. The antidote to unconscious behavior is not willpower. It is not discipline in the conventional sense. It is metacognition, the ability to think about your own thinking, to observe your reactions before they become actions, to create, even briefly, a gap between stimulus and response. Research from Harvard psychologist Ellen Langer demonstrates that people who practice mindful awareness, not meditation necessarily, but deliberate, conscious attention to their own mental states, make measurably better decisions, maintain emotional stability under pressure, and are significantly less susceptible to manipulation and groupthink. This is the awareness advantage, and it does not require years of therapy or spiritual practice. It begins with a single disciplined habit. Before reacting, asking why. Why does this situation feel threatening? Why does this person's opinion feel so destabilizing? Why am I about to make this decision? And who, or what, is actually driving it? That pause, that fraction of a second of conscious inquiry, is where human behavior begins to evolve beyond its default settings. That is where the ancient brain meets the modern mind. And that is where you stop being a product of your programming and start becoming the author of your responses. Here is the reframe that changes everything. The people around you who act strangely are not broken. They are unexamined. They are running on inherited patterns, biological defaults, and accumulated pressures that no one ever helped them decode. And for a long time, perhaps longer than you would like to admit, so were you. But knowledge restructures everything. The moment you understand the architecture, you stop taking behavior personally. You stop being a passive recipient of other people's unresolved patterns. You begin to see the mechanism behind the mask, and in doing so, you develop something rare and genuinely powerful: compassion without confusion. You can understand why someone behaves the way they do without excusing it. You can recognize the pattern without becoming part of it. That is not naivety. That is precision. We began this video with a stranger in a coffee shop, someone whose behavior seemed inexplicable, even alarming. But we end somewhere far more important. We end with you. Because the real question this science asks is not why do other people act so strangely. The real question, the one that has the power to genuinely change the trajectory of your relationships, your decisions, and your life, is this: which of your behaviors right now are you fully conscious of, and which ones are simply running on autopilot, shaped by pressures, patterns, and people you never stop to examine? Sit with that question, not to judge yourself, but to finally, clearly see yourself. Because awareness is not just the beginning of understanding human behavior. It is the beginning of changing it.